March 17, 1948. 9:23 a.m., 14 legitimate business owners in Harlem woke up to find their bank accounts frozen. Not robbed, not emptied. Frozen solid by federal order. Within 2 hours, panic spread through 125th Street like wildfire. Store owners couldn't make payroll. Restaurants couldn't pay suppliers. A barbershop owner named Clarence Thompson stood at the Bank of Harlem's marble counter, watching a teller shake her head apologetically, while his life savings sat trapped behind federal red tape. What none of them knew, what nobody in Harlem understood yet, was that this wasn't about them at all. This was about one man, Lucky Luciano, and the financial noose he'd been tightening around Harlem's throat for 3 years. But Lucky made one critical mistake. He underestimated the one person in Harlem who understood that real power isn't held at gunpoint. It's written in ledgers. And Bumpy Johnson had been keeping very careful records. See, by 1948, most people thought they understood how organized crime worked. The newspapers wrote about it, the FBI tracked it, bootlegging was over, but the power structures remained. Territories, carved up between 5 families, money flowing through policy banks and protection rackets, violence settling disputes, simple, brutal, effective. But Lucky Luciano had always been different. He didn't just want muscle and fear, he wanted legitimacy. While other mobsters invested in nightclubs and speakeasies, Lucky bought banks. Small ones. Community institutions in neighborhoods like Harlem, the Bronx, Little Italy, the places where working people kept their savings, where business owners deposited their daily take. He bought them through shell corporations and frontmen, lawyers with clean records and political connections. On paper, these banks looked independent. In reality, they were instruments, and Lucky Luciano knew how to play them beautifully. Harlem, in 1948, was experiencing something rare: actual economic growth. Black-owned businesses were thriving. The war had ended, soldiers were coming home with savings and ambition, and for the first time in decades, the neighborhood's money was staying in the neighborhood instead of flowing downtown to white-owned establishments. Policy banks, the numbers racket, had made men like Bumpy Johnson wealthy, but that wealth was being reinvested. Grocery stores expanded, restaurants opened second locations, families bought property. It was hope translated into dollars and cents. And Lucky Luciano saw an opportunity, not to take that money directly, that would start a war. Instead, he'd control it, channel it, make Harlem dependent on financial infrastructure he owned, then slowly, patiently, own Harlem itself. Bumpy Johnson had been watching this happen for 3 years. Most people saw Bumpy as a gangster, an enforcer, someone who'd spent time in prison and made his money through policy, banks, and protection. They weren't wrong, but they weren't entirely right either. Bumpy had something most criminals lacked. He understood economics. He'd educated himself in prison, reading everything from Adam Smith to Marxist theory, trying to understand how power really worked in America. And what he learned was this: violence is temporary, fear is temporary, but control over money, that's permanent. So when Lucky started buying banks, when those banks started offering predatory loans to Harlem businesses, when interest rates climbed and payment terms became impossible, Bumpy didn't react with bullets. He reacted with patience and a ledger book. For 3 years, Bumpy kept meticulous records. Every business owner who came to him complaining about sudden rate increases, he wrote it down. Every family that lost their home after falling behind on a mortgage from the Bank of Harlem, he documented it. Every time a loan was called in early, every time collateral was seized without proper notice, every single financial irregularity that Lucky's banks committed, Bumpy recorded it. Dates, amounts, names, interest rates, payment schedules that violated banking regulations, loans approved without proper documentation, money laundering through legitimate business accounts. He kept it all in a single leather-bound ledger, handwritten in precise script, cross-referenced and verified. His wife, Mame, thought he was wasting time. "You can't fight banks with paperwork," she told him. Bumpy just smiled. "You can't fight them any other way." Then came March 17th, 1948. Lucky made his power play. Using a federal judge on his payroll, he engineered an investigation into suspected illegal gambling proceeds being deposited in Harlem banks. The investigation was legitimate enough on paper. The FBI had been trying to crack down on policy operations for years, but the execution was surgical. 14 accounts frozen, all belonging to legitimate business owners who had never been charged with anything, who paid their taxes, who ran clean operations. The message was clear. Lucky could reach into your legal life and destroy it without firing a single shot. Pay tribute or watch your legitimate business crumble. It was brilliant and ruthless, and it would have worked against anyone except Bumpy Johnson. 9:47 a.m. Same morning, Bumpy walked into the offices of the New York District Attorney, not the FBI. They were too corruptible, too tied to federal judges Lucky owned. The DA's office was local, and the current district attorney, Jacob Reynolds, had built his career on being incorruptible. Self-righteous, maybe, political, certainly, but clean. Bumpy carried a leather satchel. Inside it was the ledger. He asked for Reynolds personally. The receptionist, a middle-aged white woman who looked at Bumpy like he was tracking mud on her carpet, told him the DA didn't take walk-in appointments from criminals. Bumpy set the satchel on her desk. His voice was quiet, polite, even. "Tell Mr. Reynolds that I have documented evidence of banking fraud, money laundering, racketeering, and judicial corruption involving 14 financial institutions across New York City. Tell him I have account numbers, dates, names, and transaction records. And tell him if he doesn't see me in the next 10 minutes, I'll take this ledger to the New York Times." Instead, she saw him in 7 minutes. Jacob Reynolds was 53 years old, 6 feet tall, gray hair perfectly styled, suit pressed sharp enough to cut. He'd prosecuted bootleggers, corrupt cops, union bosses. He had political ambitions. Mayor, maybe, governor someday. He sat behind a mahogany desk in an office lined with law books and framed commendations. And he looked at Bumpy Johnson like something distasteful had crawled into his civilized space. Bumpy sat down without being invited. He placed the ledger on the desk between them. Reynolds didn't touch it. "Mr. Johnson, I'm aware of your reputation. If you're here to—" Bumpy interrupted him. "Charles Luciano has been using legitimate banking institutions to launder gambling proceeds, extort business owners, and manipulate federal banking regulations. This ledger contains 3 years of documented evidence. Transaction records, loan agreements, interest rate manipulations, names of shell corporations, and most importantly," he paused, letting the weight settle, "the name of a federal judge who signed off on illegal asset freezes this morning. Judge Walter Harrison. I have records of payments made to him through a law firm called Castellano and Associates, 12 payments over the last 18 months, totaling $87,000. The room went absolutely silent. Reynolds' face didn't change, but his hand moved slowly toward the ledger. He opened it. Page after page of meticulous handwriting, dates, names, amounts, cross-references, bank statements, photocopied somehow, obtained through methods Reynolds probably didn't want to know about. Loan documents with signatures, letters between bank managers and known associates of Lucky Luciano. It was airtight, professional, the kind of documentation that prosecutors dream about but rarely see. Reynolds looked up. His voice was careful. "Where did you get this?" Bumpy leaned back in his chair. "I'm a concerned citizen. People in my community are being exploited. I thought the law should know." Reynolds almost smiled. Almost. Mr. Johnson, we both know what you are. Bumpy's expression didn't change. And we both know what you need. You want to be mayor, you need a case that makes headlines. I'm handing you Lucky Luciano's entire financial operation wrapped in a bow. The only question is whether your ambition is bigger than your prejudice. 3 hours later, Reynolds convened an emergency meeting with the State Banking Commission and two federal prosecutors he trusted. One's not on Lucky's payroll. By 4 p.m., the frozen Harlem accounts were released. By 6 p.m., the accounts of 4 banks linked to Luciano's shell corporations were frozen instead. By midnight, Judge Walter Harrison was being questioned by federal agents about unusual deposits in his personal accounts. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected, because Reynolds was smart enough to know that Lucky would start destroying evidence the moment he realized what was happening. Search warrants were executed at dawn the next morning, bank records seized, managers arrested. Within 72 hours, the entire financial network Lucky had spent 3 years building was exposed. Newspapers ran front-page stories about corruption and criminal infiltration of legitimate banking. Reynolds gave press conferences, presenting himself as the crusader who'd uncovered it all. He never mentioned Bumpy Johnson. That was the deal. Lucky Luciano was untouchable himself. He'd been deported to Italy 2 years earlier, operating from Sicily through proxies. But his American operation was dismantled, associates arrested, shell corporations dissolved, the banks were put into receivership, eventually sold to legitimate institutions. The financial pressure on Harlem evaporated overnight. Business owners who'd been facing ruin found themselves suddenly freed from predatory loans. Interest rates normalized, the neighborhood breathed, and in a small office above a jazz club on 145th Street, Bumpy Johnson sat with a glass of bourbon, watching the sunset. He destroyed an empire without firing a single shot, without spilling a single drop of blood, with nothing but patience, observation, and a leather-bound ledger book. The old-timers in Harlem still tell this story. Most people remember Bumpy Johnson for other things: the violence, the territory wars, the time he spent in Alcatraz. But the ones who were there in 1948, who owned businesses on 125th Street, who watched their accounts freeze and then miraculously unfreeze within hours, they remember different. They remember that Bumpy understood something most gangsters never learned. Real power isn't about who you can hurt, it's about what you know, when you know it, and who you tell. Lucky Luciano controlled banks, judges, politicians. Bumpy controlled information. And in that battle, information won. Because violence can be answered with violence, fear with fear, bullets with bullets, but facts documented in meticulous detail, cross-referenced and verified, presented to someone who can use them. That's a weapon nobody can defend against. Lucky learned that the hard way. By the time he realized Bumpy had been documenting everything, building a case while Lucky built an empire, it was too late. The ledger existed, the evidence was presented, and no amount of money or muscle could make it disappear. There's a lesson here about power that goes beyond Harlem in 1948. We think of organized crime as violent, chaotic, impulsive. And often it is. But the criminals who last, who build something sustainable, are the ones who understand systems, economics, law, information. Bumpy Johnson was a gangster. Yes, he ran policy banks, enforced territory, did things that put him in prison, but he was also someone who understood that knowledge is leverage. 3 years of watching, 3 years of recording, 3 years of patience, and when the moment came, when Lucky overplayed his hand and exposed himself, Bumpy had exactly what he needed. Not a gun, a ledger. That's strategic thinking. That's playing chess while everyone else plays checkers. And that's why, 75 years later, people still tell this story. So what would you have done if someone was slowly tightening a financial noose around your community, using legal structures and political connections to do it. How would you respond? Would you fight violence with violence and guarantee your own destruction? Or would you do what Bumpy did? Watch, document, wait for the perfect moment, and then use this system against itself. Think about it, because power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's written in a ledger book, recorded in careful script, waiting for someone brave enough to present it to people who can actually do something about it. That's not how gangster movies usually end, but it's how this one did. And Harlem's still here to prove it worked. If this story made you rethink what you know about power, strategy, and the way systems really work, share it. Drop a comment about the smartest strategic move you've ever seen someone make. In business, in life, anywhere. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about the moments when intelligence defeated brute force, when patience won over impulsiveness, when someone understood the game better than everyone else playing it. And remember, violence is temporary, fear is temporary, but information, that's forever. See you in the next one.